Hey there, so I saw this video yesterday called Why Are Bands Mysteriously Disappearing by Rick Beato, super popular on YouTube. And he says, where did all the bands go? Specifically from the mainstream. And he's actually reacting to a video by Richard Osmond, who talks about how over the past few decades, bands and groups, not just like rock artists, but groups in general, have disappeared from the charts over the course of time, and that now, as Rick says in his video, amongst the top 400 Spotify artists most streamed, there's only three bands that are part of that have come up within the past sort of 10 years, which is a bit insane, to be honest with you. But I watched it, and as YouTube likes to do, it likes to spew other videos along the same vein to me. And I saw a video by Anthony Fantano, and he was kind of giving his points as to why he thinks this has happened, particularly amongst kind of bands and groups. And it also led me to an interesting video by Frank Zappa, who talked about how producers in the 60s were a bit more experimental in terms of the music they produced, because they weren't as aware of why certain music was popular. They would just put it out because they saw it was popular, and that how producers and heads of labels over time found the pattern or curated bands or artists based on what they thought the public would like, rather than the public informing what producers should put out. And that filter has funneled its way to its kind of finest point now, where you listen to the top 10, and to my untrained ear, who isn't in that kind of mainstream pop artist R&B world, it all sounds pretty similar. You know, this isn't a critique about why people like what they like. If you're into that music, fair enough, that's absolutely fine. This isn't about my taste being better than your taste. I don't even think that's a thing. You know, you've got your taste, fair enough. I'm not going to go into the fine details of what Rick goes into, but he reckons the biggest change is when producers started getting involved and working alongside bands, or actually just writing songs for bands and then putting it out, and it not even really being their work, which is really interesting. But I think the key thing is, ultimately the biggest change that we've seen over the past 10 years is a couple of things, which both Anthony Fantano and Rick Beato both say. It's about the ease of being able to create music, i.e. one person can sit in a bedroom and make a track and release it within a day, a week, whatever. Equally, the biggest thing is it comes down to money. It's economics. Labels don't want to pump in money into a band when they know that they can essentially use the formula to find an artist, a single artist, and package songs ready to go for that person to put out, and they know people will consume it, or they've got a big enough stake in the mainstream scene so that they know people will consume it whether they like it or not, which is a really, really cynical view to look at it, but I think that's the reality based on what they're sharing. Rick also mentions about how it's harder to be in a band when you're with a group of people, the cost of it. He also says there's changing tastes. Every era thinks they lived in the best era for music, don't they? Everyone, no matter what age, oh yeah, it was better in my day, blah blah blah. The old man quote. But I don't necessarily agree with the changes. I think there's always passion for live music, and I believe that because I am aware of and engage with the local group that supports young people making music. And yes, there are plenty of people wanting to make the same sounding R&B, rap, hip hop stuff, whatever, that they're hearing on the radio. But there's an equal amount of people going in there and having the opportunity to create real live music, and they get so much joy from that, and they're able to express their creativity. And that's the key thing, is that the bands aren't disappearing. The bands are there. They're just not being heard as easily as they once were. There's loads of awesome music out there, and I feel really passionate about that. It's just the culture of how we consume has changed so much. It can feel like, to people who grew up in, let's not, and Rick's aware of that, he grew up in a different era. It's a completely different landscape. It's a generational thing, isn't it? The landscape is so different from what we're used to. It almost feels uncomfortable. But to say the bands are gone, and I think Rick's aware of that. He knows what he's doing. He's on YouTube. He knows how to get the clicks. That title got me to click, and I hope this title gets you to click. That's the game, isn't it? But I don't think Rick is as cynical as that. I think he's just trying to give his perspective, and a fair perspective, because he's in the industry, isn't he? So he'll have felt that change firsthand as to why these things might happen. But I'm not as, a lot of people get upset about this and say there's no good music anymore, live music, bands, groups, whatever. And I fundamentally disagree with that. There is so much awesome music out there. We just need to make a bit more noise for it to be heard. And I do agree that the mainstream isn't going to change overnight. It might take a few generations for there's normally cycles, aren't there? We can cycle back. We can, when we think of eras, when we think of the 90s music scene, certain things will pop into your head. Same with the 70s, 80s. And we'll all have our own personal perspective on music and what we deem as good or better. I remember when I was a kid, learning guitar, I went to get my guitar fixed by a local luthier. He was a really good jazz musician. He fixed it, and his opinion was that there was no good music after the 1930s. After the 1930s, there was nothing good anymore. It's all rubbish. And my response to that was, what? Not even the Red Hot Chili Peppers? Which maybe isn't the best response to an accomplished jazz musician who thinks there was nothing better prior to the 1930s. But again, it's all perspective. There's no right or wrong. I just wanted to talk about this topic because I talk about this topic with people in the home, and everyone's got their own opinion, but I really like engaging with it. And I don't feel as cynical as some of the people on. I've seen some really cynical views on YouTube, not from Rick or Anthony Fantano, but other people online get a bit like there's nothing out there. And I don't agree with that. I think we just need to look a bit harder and advocate and support the local and underground or the lesser known acts, because people have the same passion. Unfortunately, it's just a bit harder to get where some of these bands need to be. And without support, you wouldn't have heard of any of your favourite bands. Any of the bands you listen to, you wouldn't have heard of if they weren't supported. It's the people that can make a difference.
Another point people I've seen put across is that modern festivals kind of reflect the changes in people's tastes and that there aren't as many good bands out there. This one is a Download Festival in the UK this year, 2024, and you can kind of see how they got that point. I mean, look at those headliners. All those bands have been going for years and years. However, Download also massively advocate for the underground music, particularly in the heavier scene. And I think the difference goes back to Beato's and Fantano's point. All those big names, they had tons of backing back in the day, so you were more aware of their music. They got a bit of a push, they were on the mainstream. And that's not to say these bands didn't have talent at the time. Of course, they were massively talented, and they had to have the songs for people to connect with, so taking nothing away from them. However, to say there's no good bands out there when at the lower half of that poster there are some amazing artists is a bit short-sighted, to be fair. I think it just reflects the way that this type of music is getting pushed, particularly in the mainstream.
There's so much awesome talent out there that could be our future festival headliners, and it's the power of the people that's going to get the new bands those top spots. So I think what I wanted to do today is just advocate, look, the bands aren't disappearing. There's a lot of doom and gloom about, oh God, there's no good music anymore. There's loads of good music all the time. It can be difficult because with the advent of Spotify and things like that, it muddies the waters because there's so much out there. But I'm hopeful, and I've been, I go to festivals that really help promote underground music, and the bands are there. The bands are there, 100%. They just don't have the same backing, unfortunately. But people can make it's the people that get these bands, get these artists where they are. Beato and Fantano, there's something right in what they say, that people's tastes have changed. I mean, look at the difference in these Reading lineups from 2003 to this year. Just check out the difference. And there's nothing wrong with that, really. You can be annoyed about how the lineup is more mainstream, but that's what Reading has always been, about the mainstream, and currently that is the mainstream, like it or not. But that's not to say there isn't still awesome music out there. The one thing we do need to do is support the grassroots, the mid-tier bands, so that they're able to be creative. It's really, really hard to be in a band, not just from a personal, creative, expressive standpoint. there's also just the practical financial cost of being in a band. You can't just be in a band and tour and that's it and make your living. That's not happening. It doesn't quite work like that. So supporting those bands is vital if you do want them to get anywhere. That's how the bands that are apparently disappearing are going to be seen. So yeah, I mean, I'm always up for discovering new things. Like I say, I'm not going to just list a load of bands you need to listen to, but I might ironically make a Spotify playlist of some of my recent discoveries to show you there is, from my own personal taste and opinion, there's awesome stuff out there. And actually, I'm hopeful, and there are people out there with the same passion but infinitely more resources to get that music out to you through events, festivals, putting on showcases. So yeah, support your local scene, support the bands that you're passionate about. Let's not get stuck in nostalgia, mate, because every generation thinks their generation had the best music. let's be honest. But that's not to say there's still awesome stuff out there. Let me know your thoughts, guys. I really enjoyed chatting about this subject because the differing perspectives are really interesting. But yeah, let me know your thoughts and like, subscribe, do all the clicky things. And yeah, cheers for watching, guys. Take it easy.